In the previous videos, we saw how variables behave when defined in our scripts. Now we'll take a look and see how they behave when defined inside of functions. So now we've seen how to declare our variables and the different names and ways we can declare them. But there's an important part of variables that we call scope that's really important for you to understand if you're going to be programming in JavaScript. Variables themselves are limited to where they can be used. If you create a variable from within a function, you can only use that variable from somewhere inside of that function. Let's take a look at an example. First thing I'm going to do is create a variable called world. And this will be a string that just contains the string world and an exclamation point. Nothing new here, but now I'm going to create a function. You'll remember from Intro to Programming that functions are a construct that allow us to store pieces of code into something that we can execute later. So the way we define a function is using the function keyword, giving that function a name. For instance, I will give this function the name, say, hello. It's important to understand that actually this name of our function must follow the same rules as variables, because actually what's happening here is we're creating a variable called say hello, and its value is a function. This is just a special way of defining a variable whose value is a function. So then after our function name, we have parentheses, and we're not going to take any arguments, so these parentheses are empty. And then we'll have our curly braces to define the body of our code. Now this is where function scope comes into play. So let's create a variable inside of our function called hello, and give it the value, hello, with a space. Then the next line of our function will be console.log, and this will output to our console. And the value we want to output is the concatenation of the two strings. First is hello, and then we want to concatenate that using the plus operator, which means to join the strings together, with world. So we're using two variables in here to create a string of hello world. Now to actually run this, we must invoke say hello, and to do that we simply do say hello, and then parentheses to actually execute the function. So let's save that. So let's go back here, and I want to comment out a lot of our other stuff right here. So what I'm going to do is just comment it out. And now the only console.log we have is inside say hello. So now when we save this out, and we visit our browser and refresh, we see hello world is printed into our console. And this is from the say hello function. So in this piece of code, we see a couple of interesting things. First, we're able to define a variable inside of say hello, and that variable name is hello. And you can see we were able to access it on the line with console.log. The variable hello is able to be used. But we're also able to access world, and world is actually defined outside of the function in what we call the global scope. And that means world can be accessed anywhere, from inside any function or outside of any function. Now globals are special because we want to make sure that they never interact with each other. So you want to be careful with the global variables you create. If you include a library or another JavaScript file that has its own globals, if both of your scripts have a global variable with the same name, one is going to overwrite the other. So you should be very careful when defining global variables like world. In our case, it's okay because we know this is our only script, and we know that world will not be used in any other context except for this context. So after our say hello invocation, what do we think that the values of world and the hello variables would be? Well, let's check it out. We'll do console.log, and we'll put a little message here, world outside of say hello. And as our second argument, we'll have the world variable. So let's run this. If we refresh, we can see we get our console, world outside of say hello. Its value is world. And that makes sense. We defined its value to be world right up there. Nothing has changed by the time we get to console.log, so its value is fairly predictable. But what happens if we try to access hello from outside of the say hello function? Well, we could do console.log with hello outside of say hello and pass in hello as the argument. So if we save this out and run it, what we actually get is an uncaught reference error, which tells us hello is not defined. And that's because we defined hello from inside of say hello, which means that's the only place that we're ever able to access that variable. We're able to use it on our console.log hello plus world line because it also resides inside of the body of our say hello function. However, our console.log at the end of our script is outside of our say hello function, which means that it cannot access our hello variable. Now this is good because our hello from inside of our function does not interact with any variables outside of it. So it's a great way to keep your information contained. However, anytime you use a variable, you need to make sure that it's in scope. Now, JavaScript allows us to actually create functions inside of functions. So let's take a look at how that interacts with how we're able to use variables. So I'm going to modify our code here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out this line here because it triggers an error and is not allowed. So we're going to keep the first line of our sayHello function the same. However, we're going to create another function inside of sayHello by doing function, and we'll call this inner. And we'll declare it the exact same way. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move our final console.log hello world inside of our inner function. And to add a little bit more to this, what I'll do is inside of our inner function define a variable called extra. And we'll say there is more. And we'll add that to our console.log. Now, right now, if we executed say hello, nothing would happen because we're not executing our inner function. So we'll do the same type of thing. We'll execute inner right after we define it. So let's save this out and we'll refresh our page. And now we can see it prints out hello world, there is more. So what we've seen is an extension of what we saw in the last example. From 2 layers deep inside of a function definition, we're able to access world, which is global, but we're also able to access hello. And that's because this line right here, though it resides inside of inner, the inner function itself also resides inside of say hello, where hello is defined. Therefore, inside of inner, we have access to that hello variable. And of course, we also, from inside of inner, have access to the extra variable, which is itself defined inside of inner. So if we want to determine whether or not we can use a variable, we'll take a look at the line where it's used, and then we'll take a look at the functions defined around it and see if we can't find that variable. So for instance, if we wanted to check for hello, we see it's on this line inside of inner. Is hello defined in the function inner? No, only extra is. So what we can do is we'll go and see the function wrapped around that. And that function is say hello, and there we do find the variable hello. So by going up the level of nested functions, we're able to find hello, and therefore we're able to use it. The same goes with extra, except we find it right in the function where it's used. And the same goes for world, because as we move up and out of say hello, we enter the global scope where world is defined. However, in these lines here, like we commented out, we could not use hello, because if we take a look at where this console.log lies, it lies in the global scope. So the only place we can look for the hello variable is inside of the global scope, where it's definitely not defined, and that's how we get our errors. So it's pretty simple. Anytime that you're trying to determine what variables you have access to, take a look at the function most immediately defined around your code. If it's not there, look at the next level function defined around that until you reach the global scope. Once you've reached the global scope, if you have not found that variable, then it's not a variable that you can use. So now we've seen how functions affect the scope of our variables. Up next, we'll see what happens when 2 variables in different scopes share the same name.